Cashology by FMBO, a podcast devoted to the art and science of managing your money. It's like school, except your only homework is living your best financial life. Class is now in session. The extra paycheck month. Ooh, gosh, just those words make me so excited. There are so many things you could do with that extra paycheck coming your way. Personally, I would love to spend it on yet another coffee maker because I think I'm addicted to coffee, but I know that that's not what I'm supposed to do. That is why we have Michaela Dombroski with us today. She's going to help us figure out what we're supposed to do with that extra paycheck. Welcome to the Cashology podcast, hosted by your guide on the path to financial savvy, me, Juli. And like I said, today we have Michaela Dombroski with us, an employee of FMBO, who I am ecstatic to have to teach us about what to do with that extra paycheck. Welcome, Michaela.
Hi, thanks for having me.
We are so glad to have you. You know, I know that you've been with FMBO for almost over 10 years. Can you tell us a little bit about your experience?
Yeah, absolutely. I spent the first 6 years of my career working in the branches, and now I work in our customer care center with our personal banking team and our team leads. And we help customers over the phone, service their accounts, open accounts, close accounts.
So Michaela has so much experience with customers. And I'm sure, Michaela, you have seen plenty of people like me who would like to spend their extra paycheck on something so silly, like an extra coffee maker, when I already have two. And it makes lattes when I don't even drink lattes. I mean, truly, I don't know where my mind goes sometimes. But I need you to help me. When we get this extra flush of income, whether it's from an extra paycheck or whatever it may be, I mean, where should my mind be on where it goes?
Well, it's easy to spend it on frivolous things that we don't need. But I think thinking about the future and making a plan of what you want to do with that money in the future, put it away in a savings account. Do you need an emergency fund? Set it aside for a larger purchase down the road. You know, a certificate of deposit, something that's harder to access. But really having a plan in mind of what you want to do with that money, not what you want to do with it in the moment.
It's so easy for me to see that extra paycheck and think, I have no responsibilities tied to it. This is something unplanned. Therefore, I can plan on using it for anything my heart desires and reward myself. I guess that's kind of the gist of it. But I need to remind myself that rewarding myself could be saving it.
I think the biggest thing would just be making a plan of what you want to use that money for, whether it's paying off debt or saving it for a rainy day, and then coming up with a plan of how you're not going to touch it. If it's having it come out of your paycheck and automatically go into another account, so you don't even see it in your main account, or setting it aside in a CD that is harder to access, so you don't even have the temptation, could help significantly.
I sometimes feel, Michaela, a little guilty of doing that because I do that with my finances. I tend to hide it away from myself because, as highlighted throughout the course of this episode, I have a problem with self-control at times. I'm purchasing. But if we did try to hide that money from ourselves, it isn't necessarily admitting fault. It's just finding a new way to put the funds somewhere, organize our finances, right?
Yeah. I think in time you condition yourself to kind of forget about it. If it's out of sight, out of mind, you learn not to expect it. Doesn't mean that on once in a while you can't use it on something you really want. If your long-term goal is to save up to buy a home, that doesn't mean you can't go and buy a coffee maker or, splurge on a pair of shoes. But for the most part, I think if you don't think about having it and you have a plan mapped out of where you want to be further down the road, it's easier not to spend that.
How do you go about planning your finances? What are some tips that you have?
I'm an impulse buyer as well. It's easy for me, especially in our environment, to hop on, online and do some shopping. I have to write it out on paper, what I want, where I want to put my money each month. So I have a visual. For me, I like to put it in different accounts so that it's separate and I don't even have the thought in mind to use it. Sometimes, depending on the month, the unexpected stuff, I may have to pull from that money that I plan to save or not use, but at least it's there as a cushion should I need it. So I really map it all out, and probably to an excessive point just to see where I want everything to go. And that makes it in my head. If I can see it on paper, I can visualize it in my brain of where I want to get to.
You're the type of person I aspire to be, because every year I buy a new planner thinking I'm going to write down, daily activities, meal plans, my finances, but I end up never using it. I always throw it away. And it's one of those things that, again, I make a goal at the beginning of every year to use it, and then it goes to the waste. But I do use electronic resources. I mean, I have an Excel doc that I manage my finances through, but I definitely don't use it enough, I think. How often do you revisit your plan?
All the time. I do the same thing. I lose track of it. I'll be really good. Start of the new year is the time to reset, and it never fails. Come March, April, I'll go from looking at it daily to maybe looking at it, every few weeks. But I definitely try and monthly look at it and see what progress I've made. And if it's not working, I maybe get a little less detailed, or I find a different way. Well, I'm constantly moving that money back to my main account. If I had a large purchase that was an emergency purchase, maybe I need to reset and work on paying off some a purchase I had to put on a credit card versus putting money in savings.
Yeah, I think when it comes to managing your finances, it's a constant habit that we need to build. Similar to, any habits that we set at the new year. For example, I set a goal to read 12 books in 2021, but I've already read 4. So I feel like I need to increase that goal, right? Or else I won't strive to be better. Same thing with finances. If I, pay off one credit card and I think, oh, that extra money is going towards me. Well, I could always divert those funds that I would have paid off my credit card with in the future to a retirement savings account or my student loans, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, we need to constantly be assessing our finances. And it's good that you have that insight and you do that habit.
I think to your point, exactly. When you have something unexpected come in, like an extra paycheck, really thinking further ahead of what to do with it, not just what you want to do with it, putting it in a high yielding savings account, or upping your 401 contribution. Those are great things you can do that'll give you more bang for your buck.
Makes a lot of sense. And coming from someone who has been in front of customers for over 10 years at our bank, what would you say to a customer that maybe an impulse buyer, maybe wants to get their finances in track? What should be that first step?
First step would be to put money away, put something away, even if it's $25 here and there. In a year, it adds up. And then something unexpected happens, whether you get a flat tire or, you have an unexpected visit to the dentist and you have, a $500 bill somewhere, $25, $50 a paycheck or even a month adds up in a year's time. Really anywhere. I think when people think of savings, they have to have thousands of dollars in savings, and everyone obviously wants that. But even just a few $100s set aside that you don't have any immediate need for, except for something unexpected, it would be a huge relief to so many people. We get a lot of customers that are just looking for something unexpected happen. How am I going to pay for it? And I think just an emergency savings fund would be crucial for so many people.
And there are a ton of resources at FMBO for financial planning. We have an episode on financial advisors. certainly something our customers can seek out. How about utilizing a personal banker in branch?
Absolutely. There's tons of tools, especially face-to-face, that our bankers in the branches can assist with, and go over several options with customers.
And they can help devise a budget as well.
Absolutely. For those that are like me that like to write it down on paper, or for those that are more savvy and, want to keep something electronic, they can help them either way.
That's really great. And I'm definitely someone who likes to talk through my decisions to make sure that I have a sound mind and I'm going down the right path. So talking with a personal banker or talking with a financial planner makes a lot of sense for me. But if you are very individualistic and you want to just pursue it on your own, there are certainly resources that FMBO could supply as well.
Absolutely.
This is great, Michaela. You have been a really great help. I think you talked me into not quite buying the coffee maker yet. Save it away for a rainy day. And that's the smartest move to make.
Save it up for the big espresso machine.
Good. Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Well, thanks for having me.
And anyone who's listening, if you want to learn more about products FMBO has to offer or services to build your financial budget, go to fmbo.com. Investment products are not FDIC insured, not a deposit or other obligation of the bank, not insured by any federal government agency, not guaranteed by the bank, may lose value. This podcast should not be copied, reproduced without permission. Information and statements within this podcast are subject to change without notice. Information and statements in this podcast are for informational purposes only and are not intended to constitute investment advice or recommendations. First National Bank of Omaha does not make any representation or warranty as to the accuracy or completeness of any information or statements within this podcast.